you. Thanks so much.
A very good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you. As we say in my home country of South Africa, all protocols observed for all the dignitaries here this morning. It's a wonderful South Africanism where we don't have to run through the names of all the dignitaries, all protocols observed. What a pleasure it is for me to be back with Bench Events, and a pleasure indeed for me to be in Dubai after a break of a little while. A break of a day in Dubai sees tremendous change, and I am delighted to be back in this fantastic part of the world, albeit for a very short period of time. I'm going to take you through some of the core global trends that I believe are going to affect the world, and in particular the hospitality industry, over the course of the next number of years. There are a lot of charts and a lot of pictures. They're there to remind me of what I have to say next, so don't worry too much if you're suffering a minor hangover from that rather nice event last night that I did attend. I'm a political and business analyst based in Cape Town, and a lot of my work is looking at specific industries and looking at some of the monumental changes and disruptive forces that are going to buffet every aspect of our life. It's not just about business, actually. It's about ourselves as individuals as well, and the coming change in the world that all of you are at the cutting edge of. In fact, for those of you here from Dubai, you've been instrumental in a sense in changing the world. You've been instrumental in changing perceptions of this particular region, and that I can only congratulate you on. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. Now, in looking at the world and looking to see where we are at and where we are going, it's a difficult, mixed, volatile environment in which we find ourselves economically. Each major market across this world is at a different level of its current economic path. Those business cycles are more fragmented than ever before. And the days of generalizing about groups of countries, about regions, about continents, I think are over. We're going to see a world which largely defies generalization in terms of the economic progress of so many countries and critical markets across this planet. And this chart, whilst you're not going to go into too much detail about all the charts that I'm putting up in front of you, this chart, I think, just indicates that massive cycle and that massive divergence of economic prospects and conditions in the world at the moment. The Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, all looking good. The USA coming out of a difficult last number of years, but exceptionally volatile in terms of quarter-on-quarter GDP and other results. The EU struggling just to find its feet right now, and the jury is still out on issues surrounding Greece and the potential Grexit from the EU. Africa looking relatively good, I must tell you, and as it's my home continent, I get quite excited about Africa's economic fortunes and prospects into the future. In fact, in terms of overall global growth, Africa expected to grow at about 4.5% per annum, more or less, over this year, and probably into next year as well. It's the second fastest growing region of the world, with the exception, of course, of the Chinas and Indias of this world. So there's a divergence across the planet, and there are important markets to look at, where those divergences, of course, are in positive territory. Coming from a continent of emerging market countries, and frontier markets for that matter, the core trend to me going forward is still about emerging markets. It's still within the next year, just within the next year, nearly 90% of the world's population will live in emerging markets. We could just stop the talk, and that's all that to me is important. Your people, your customers, your clients, the future really is about integrating these rising emerging market societies into all aspects of our business. In the next year, 2/3 of all global growth will occur in emerging markets. And yes, we see the United States looking better at 3% GDP. Perhaps it'll maintain that, perhaps it'll drop back a little bit. Yes, Europe climbing into just about positive territory, 1% GDP, a little more than that. The jury's out on that. It's emerging markets still that are growing at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% for that matter. That's where the excitement is going to be. And I think in terms of trends, we've just seen that trend in emerging market consumption patterns look so much more positive over the course of the last number of years and, of course, into the next 30, 40 years. That level of global consumption coming from emerging markets is going to continue unabated. And, of course, that's where you will be looking to position your hotels, to brand your hotels. Well, I come from Africa, where there's a tremendous emerging market, an emerging market of 300 million people. Where are these people going to stay? They're going to be traveling soon. They're going to be looking for relatively affordable accommodation across the African continent. The same could be said for rising middle classes from other developing parts of the world, from India for that matter, not ready yet to pay top dollar 5-star rates in hotels, but looking for moderate accommodation for a nascent and emerging domestic and intercontinental tourism industry. Now, I think there's a tremendous gap. There's a tremendous gap away from super luxury, in a sense, to that affordable market for developing countries. I know hotel groups that are involved in this. I've been involved with 1 or 2 of them who are looking, of course, at expanding an Africa exposure. I think that's a critical area of the market to look at as millions of people move into a position where they can, perhaps for the first time, afford to come to a relatively reasonable hotel. Much of this positioning with regards to moving and taking advantage of emerging markets has to be, of course, accredited to the expansion of the Middle Eastern Gulf airlines. And I don't just say that because I'm here in Dubai, but ultimately the hub of Dubai, and for that matter Abu Dhabi, and for that matter of Doha, have created a reawakening, an integration of the emerging markets of this world into the global hospitality and other business sectors. And it's thanks to this. It's thanks to these hubs. And I get very excited, I must tell you, when I visit Dubai Airport at 3 a.m. in the morning, when I'm feeling exhausted and I see the crossroads of the world in Dubai at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's exciting for me. It's a trend that was identified here, and it's a trend, I believe, that will continue for some time to come with even more enthusiasm. That's why I like the idea of new aircraft, new orders, that fantastic new Dubai World Center Airport that's going to be developed, currently is already. By 2025, in the next 10 years or so, the world's going to welcome at least 1.8 billion international visitor arrivals, a 58% increase from the 1.1 billion international arrivals who crossed borders only a year ago. It's a tremendous increase. By 2025, the US will still dominate international visitors' arrivals, but China will be close behind, a difference of only 6 million visitors between the US and China. Look at that growth market. It's coming, and I'm not sure whether we're ready, in a sense, for the numbers that are going to come out of China. China's domestic market growth is probably going to be even more robust. So again, differentiating your product for international travels and for domestic travelers is critical. And I know that some of the hotel groups here are creating, of course, their own domestic Chinese brands to cater for specific needs from that growing sector of the market. We know that Chinese tourists have been spending more and more as they have integrated into the world. We know, of course, they're the biggest spenders. Per capita, the Chinese tourists, we also know that so many others spend plenty when they travel. It's interesting on that particular graph, just have a look, the rise of spending of Russian travelers across the world and how important that has been to so many critical cities and areas of the world to take advantage of a rising Russian middle class. Of course, that has changed as a result of political factors over the course of the last while. Now, I can be very bullish about emerging markets and the necessity to provide those emerging markets with properties. That's your job, of course. But the reality of the world, of course, is that economic volatility is going to play a substantial role. And you've seen that economic volatility as the gloss of emerging markets has waned in the investment community over the course of the last year or two or three. And you've seen the decline in the value of domestic currencies, particularly in emerging market countries, making it quite difficult for many of these travelers to purchase luxury hotel rooms in US dollar or in other foreign currencies. This volatility in currency is going to continue, I believe, to be a trend. Markets will wax and wane in terms of whether they can afford to spend in dollars and what kind of properties they are looking at to house their business and their leisure travelers. The volatility, of course, also continues in what's known as the BRICS group of countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the little small s for my home country, South Africa, that was added on to the BRICS community only a few years ago. Look at that volatility as well. We've seen that China's GDP growth rate starting to slip, and the medium to longer term projections show that China at 7 or 7.5% GDP might be a thing of the past. We might well see China slip to below 7%. It's certainly going to have an effect overall on Chinese growth outside of China, investment opportunities outside of China. It's unlikely to have any major impact on domestic tourism in China or, in fact, foreign Chinese arrivals, because I think that growth of that middle class is going to propel that travel industry into the future, despite a small downturn in Chinese GDP. When 1.3 billion people are still growing at 7% per annum, it's no mean feat. And that is a credit to China. India now looks as though its GDP growth rate is going to exceed that of China for the first time. And I like the Indian market in terms of both domestic and external travelers from India, because I think we're on the cusp in a sense. I think India might be 20 years behind China in creating those millions and millions of middle-class citizens. I think that might be one of the core features of our time for the next 20 years in future, an Indian revival. And I think that's going to come as well. The poor Russians, as we know, for political reasons by and large, but also for other factors, domestic factors as well, seeing their economy slump and perhaps now into negative territory over the course of the next while, affecting, of course, the value of the ruble. There's been a rebound in the value of the ruble. Very fortunate for those of you reliant upon Chinese inbound, Russian inbound tourists for that matter, but I think there's going to be tremendous volatility on currency markets, and this market in particular will wax and wane. And one other thing about Russia, I must just say, Russia is an aging population, a dramatically aging population over the medium to longer term. And this issue of age is something that I will touch upon just a little bit later. It's already been mentioned by Jonathan in his opening remarks. The big markets to me, clearly, over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years or so, really revolve around China, and I also believe, perhaps a little bit further into the future, around India. 174 million Chinese tourists will spend a record $260 billion US dollars by 2019, and 60% of those travelers are going to be young, under the age of 34 years. So the concentration on products for young people, I think, well-founded in terms of the opening remarks and discussion here as well. We've seen the expansion of the Chinese domestic tourism industry, remarkable figures coming out of that industry. If you're in Boeing or you're in Airbus, well, that's where your market is. One brand new plane will take to China's skies every other day for the next 2 decades. That's where you want to be if you're selling commercial airliners. But there's no doubt to me that tourism and those who are operating in an inbound tourism market, much like the GCC countries and much like you here, are going to be reliant upon quality infrastructure. And that, of course, you are delivering. It's quality infrastructure that will bring those tourists to you in a seamless and efficient manner. That's what you've done, and that will perpetuate, I believe, much of this flow of people through this particular region into the future. You know, I show the earlier slide of the lovely new airports in this region. I was recently in New York, and with any apologies to any Americans here in the audience, I had to suffer through a check-in process at New York's LaGuardia Airport, which is in deep need of complete renovation, I must tell you. The comparison between the airports here, that infrastructure here, and some of the staid and old infrastructure that exists in much of the rest of the Western world in particular, and increasingly contrasts the two regions, and it also contrasts what travelers want. And certainly when I looked at my experience in poor old LaGuardia, it was a pleasure coming through this part of the world. We know that a big trend in the world is going to be urbanization. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. But across the world, human beings are moving from rural areas into urban conurbations at a speed never experienced before in human history. The top picture there is of Lagos, 40 million people in Lagos alone by 2050. 40 million. The bottom picture is Chongqing in China, often a city that the biggest city in the world, often that one has never heard of. Chongqing in China, in the greater Chongqing area, 30 million people already live. These are the powerhouse cities of the future. By 2075, 10 billion people will inhabit our planet, and about 8.5 billion of those are going to live in these cities. And they will live in cities that we are not necessarily that familiar with. I should offer a prize here in the audience for you to guess which is this particular city on the screen. It's quite sort of distinctive with that round wheel. It's in China, of course, Tianjin. Tianjin in China, a city of nearly 8 million people currently. It's bigger than London, Tianjin. That's going to be a focus of our work in future. We'll be identifying which particular urban areas are going to be the exciting ones. 8 million people in Tianjin. Nearly half of global GDP growth over the course of the next 10 years or so will come from just 440 cities in the world, in emerging markets. 95% of those cities, small and medium-sized cities that you might never have heard of. That's where the focus is going to be in these new markets. It's exciting. The focus, of course, as many of you know, is already technologically and web-based. China now has 642 million internet users. 642 million, double the size of the United States' entire population just in internet users in China. And of course, this brings me to a core trend that all of us already know is with us. It's all about mobile. It's all about servicing, as we've heard already, these millennials, those born anywhere between 1980 and 2000, those technologically savvy individuals. These what we call digital native millennials, those who like their phones, those who like to download apps and know how to download apps, I might say. They are going to be the dominant consumer group, set to outspend those baby boomers that was the target group for most of commerce and industry in the last few decades. They will be 50% of all travelers, these millennials, Generation Y as they are called, by 2025. 28% currently of smartphone or tablet owners used a mobile device to research their last hotel stay, nearly 1 in 3. So again, integrating your product into the mobile platform, critical given the current surveys that show the importance of this. Nearly half of these millennials agree that being able to check in or out of a hotel using their mobile device would motivate them to return. They'd feel a linkage, I suppose, in terms of their digital savviness with a product that you offer in terms of your digital footprint. So the importance of apps and the innovative use of apps into the future, a core trend. Apps go beyond basic check-in rituals now to setting room temperatures, mood lighting, background music, and even bed preferences. You can use an app for just about everything. But you will also need to use those apps that you're developing to integrate with attractions, to integrate with experiences that are becoming so much more important for your hotel guest. personalized preferences, understanding what that customer wants when they check in. Do they want a jazz festival? Do they want a desert experience? And how can that be integrated into the suggestions that the app does present to them? The integration of other critical services, for example, the use of Uber, is a natural marriage for many of these apps. And I think Hyatt's app, which integrates Uber into its experience, is a very important step in that particular direction. Of course, I might add, what we can't necessarily predict, that's the most affordable way to buy that new Apple Watch, by the way. What we can't really predict is the use of wearables and how that's going to affect us. But fairly obviously, more of us will be wearing a device and more of us will be relying upon that device to look at your particular product. Your mobile platform will move, I suppose, to wearables. I already have a wearable because it's my phone and it's in my pocket right now, so I do regard myself as super trendy when it comes to wearables. But for all of that talk about apps and fancy stuff and what they can do, for goodness sake, and I thought I'm here and I'm talking to hotel people, just make sure that I can plug my phone in when I'm in a hotel. Just install a nice little plug unit like that near my bed so I can charge that phone whilst I'm sleeping in a hotel. For all of the fancy tech stuff, it's still reliant upon charging for the moment and wired charging. The wireless will probably come soon. So we're in an era of severe disruption, my friends. Severe disruption, and you are at the cutting edge, in a sense, of this disruption. Some of you will have seen this particular graphic, which is very telling about the disruptive nature of business that we are going through right now. Uber is the world's largest taxi company, but it owns no vehicles. Facebook is the world's most popular media owner, but it creates no content. You create Facebook's content. Alibaba is the most valuable retailer, and it has no inventory at all. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. These four examples of extreme disruption that few of us, including myself, including futurist gurus, would have been at pains to predict 5 or even 10 years ago. That Airbnb timeline of listings is astonishing when you look at this particular chart. Nearly 1 million listings projected now at the beginning of 2015. Airbnb, disruptive certainly to your industry. It, according to Don Rook of Rocket Trip, saves 41% or an average of $102 per night compared to hotels if you use Airbnb. And the big disruption, which I think Airbnb already provides in a sense, it's not just a disruption about properties and where to stay, it's a disruption on price. And price is going to be a battleground in future, I strongly believe. Airbnb transactions are moving now beyond, of course, the leisure traveler to business travelers across the world. The business travel on Airbnb website already an attractive option instead of the Starwoods and the Marriotts. And I say this because it is an issue that needs to be addressed. To me, it's one of the core disruptive trends of your industry over the course of the next while. We know that a big trend, of course, has been online travel, and bookings from online travel websites in particular have become, of course, de rigueur. That's how we operate. Expedia, of course, the biggest travel retailer now in the world. The Chinese and the Indians are increasingly looking at online sales and online penetration for their bookings. And again, look at the chart. Look at the red line. Look at the blue line. It's China or it's India. Look at that rise in bookings online. And of course, it's not just the Expedias and the Travelocities and the Orbitses of this world that we all know about in a sense, but regional online websites are offering interesting and varied alternatives to these sources. So understanding and integrating with the regional variations in websites like Ovago, which operates predominantly in the East African market, also critically important. Just scanning that web environment is going to be very important. And of course, if the Expedias think they had it easy, or the kayaks think they had it easy, the looming battle now on the web, the simple search looming battle between looking for a hotel room rate for me now in future will be between Google and possibly Amazon. What could be easier in a sense than me keying in hotel room rates in Dubai, and Google will give me Google's rates near the top of that search. That's where, of course, the battlegrounds for bookings are going to be in future. Nearly 50% of all hotel guests have not visited the hotel's specific website before arrival. Nearly 50%. So they are looking at price. They are looking, of course, at what Google and what Kayak and what Expedia offer. They're not going to the hotel's website. And I'm not in your business. I'm an outside consultant. If I was in your business, I would love a customer to want to come to my official website, to want to see whether there's a benefit in me coming and booking through your particular website. So incentivizing a customer to come to your specific website, I think, is an important competitive edge for you into the future. Nearly 80% of guests see price as a key factor when choosing a hotel. So fundamentally, again, providing that differential from your website to what an Expedia website offers to me as a client, not in the industry, is an important option for you. This, of course, all means that these millennial travelers that we talk about so often rely less on brands. They're more price conscious, they're more interested in the reviews and reputation of hotels rather than on the brands. And again, this graph will be made available to you if you want to have a look at it. But you can just see the Generation Y. Look at this particular chart here at the end. Generation Y, the millennials that we talk about, just less concerned about brands, about hotel brands, much more concerned about the reviews of those hotels. And it's significant, of course, for you as well. How do you combat this? Well, you develop a digital ecosystem that so many of you are doing. I've used an example here of Hilton Hotels, which has a pretty good, and I'm sure many of you do. I'm not showing any favoritism here. I don't have any business interests in Hilton at all. But Hilton certainly have been able to integrate nicely the Facebook experience and, again, with the Twitter experience. That Hilton Help is a very effective tool of channeling any issue regarding Hilton into that Twitter feed and very quickly responding to issues. That's a plus for your hotel. So many just don't do it, and Hilton seem to be getting it right. Combating and playing with and understanding and using review sites, very critical, I believe, for you. And as Warren Buffett said, and every good speaker has to quote Warren Buffett once somewhere in a talk, and it's very relevant for your particular industry, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And it's so true when it comes to TripAdvisors, when it comes to, of course, reputation management. It's a difficult slide, and I want to gloss over it quite quickly. It's a topic, of course, of its own. You are now going to have accessible to you more data and more analytics than ever before. Use that data and use that analytics. It's a critical trend going forward, and I believe that this data input that we are going to be getting from sensors in particular is going to increase exponentially the world's available stock of data for all of us to mine and for all of us to use. But for all of this stuff, you need people. You need talent. The war for digital talent has largely begun. And 90% of companies largely don't have the necessary digital talent, or certainly don't have it at the moment, to be able to integrate all of these features into their product in a particularly competitive environment. 30% of global hoteliers plan to hire staff specifically for social media. And I can't stress how important enough that is to put that into the broader equation. So hotel groups are reacting. Hotel groups all over are reacting to these demands, and I'm pleased to see it. The proliferation of brands, sub-brands, you name it, which we see here on display, they are everywhere, trying to cater for a different person with different needs. The personalization aspects of the market, very, very important. But there's some broader trends that I think are important as well. There's a very big trend to me going forward, and that is catering for female travelers. Women, indeed, are the biggest emerging market in the history of the planet. We talk about emerging markets. I think women are the biggest emerging market. And when you look at the amount of women who are going to come on stream economically By 2020, 1 billion women are going to become economically active. 1 billion women, with new demands and new issues when it comes to hotels. We see already some hotel groups looking at this particular market, and I like it. I like the fact that the Virgin Hotel Group make it possible for a customer to receive room service without having to physically engage the person delivering that tray of food. I like that, and female travelers are going to like that even more. And that, I think, is going to be a trend into the future. We speak a lot about millennials and young people, but what about older people? Let's go to Japan for a second. Look at the headline on this particular slide. Let's go to Japan. Adult diapers are going to outsell baby nappies in Japan. Yes, we can laugh at it, my friends. We might be in need of these products in the future, as we are all going to get older, as correctly said. Across the world, fertility rates are falling. By 2060, Germany's population is going to shrink by a fifth, and the number of people of working age will fall dramatically from 50 million to 35 or 36 million. Well, it says something about that market going forward. An older customer is going to need products. And indeed, take my hat off to these countries that have identified medical tourism as a very important aspect of their business. Korea, India, where medical tourism figures are increasing, and may I just say, in this particular country, with a plan here in Dubai to identify a potential 500,000 medical tourists a year is essential given an aging global population. It's an important part of your business, and hotels will need to integrate that as well into their planning. It's not just about fancy bathrooms and baths that you can't climb into when you're an older person. It's going to be taking care of this segment as well. Hotels increasingly are going to have to look, of course, at environmental issues. We know that there is climate vulnerability across this planet. Climate change is with us. Some hotels are going green. In my hometown of Cape Town, here's a hotel called the Hotel Verde. The Hotel Verde has a lovely gym, and that gym is powered by a human power generator. You cycle on the cycle, it powers the lights or it powers the gym. Very important, not only, of course, for the environment, but especially in my country, where increasingly we have power cuts. I must tell you, it's great to be able to generate my own electricity as I cycle. Global hotel brands are playing into this particular market. They're playing into a sustainability market, which is linked to a health and fitness market as well. And I'm delighted to see that. I'm delighted to see, for example, that the new Even Hotel Group are looking at coat racks that morph into pull-up bars, luggage racks that double as a workout bench, and vitamin C showers. It's going to be part and parcel of that health sustainability trend into the future as well, along with experiential travel that, again, I think has already been mentioned earlier, and I think will continue as a critical trend. Cooking courses in Italy, a big global tourism trend, and hotels are going to be very much part of that as well. Did you know that those of you who watch the Game of Thrones television series, well, look how the Game of Thrones has contributed to a rise in tourism in Dubrovnik. 10% of Dubrovnik's tourism growth in recent years has come from experiential travelers looking for a Game of Thrones experience in Dubrovnik. And linking that in, linking television, linking popular movies and film into the hotel and leisure experience, an important trend into the future. Of course, hotels also in your industry and every business industry are going to need also a commitment to ethics. Ethics in labor, ethics in the environment, ethics within the society in which they find themselves, increasingly important as well. A touchy and difficult trend into the future, I believe, is going to be around security. I don't want to sort of labor the point when it comes to security, but I just wonder whether we as an industry, and I speak here collectively because I'm here today with you, really have this uppermost in our minds, protecting our guests, protecting our properties. And I just put this in briefly to the presentation because the world is difficult. And the world increasingly is looking at terrorism as a plague across this planet. I just put this in because I think it's a critical trend going forward, having the right security personnel and meaningful security in hotels critical into the future. A big trend, I think, which is important going forward will be the easing of visa restrictions. And I'm delighted to see that you, as Emirati citizens, will no longer be needing visas to enter the Schengen group of countries. Absolutely terrific. I wish it applied to me as a South African, I must tell you. There has been a trend towards reducing visa restrictions globally. It's slow moving, but one would hope that with biometrics and with a renewed vigor to develop really meaningful biometrics, visa restrictions will drop further, encouraging, I think, travel into the future. So finally, the travel industry is braced for change. And I just thought in the last 2 minutes, here's where the real change is going to come, I think, for many of us. You may say it's flippant. I think it's going to be quite real. There's a picture of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. How many of you in this room have been to the Peabody Hotel in Memphis? Well, you're not a big Peabody Hotel in Memphis group, I must tell you. But of course, the big tradition in the Peabody Hotel was the March of the Ducks. There we go, the March of the Ducks. The ducks live in the hotel, and every day there's a little ceremony in the Peabody Hotel. The ducks are brought down, they march across the red carpet, and they come into this rather delightful little pond area in the lobby of the hotel. It's all rather lovely and all rather fun, but I'm afraid to say it's a bit of a dying trend. To me, this is a trend that hotels and other aspects of the leisure and hospitality industry are going to have to employ. Going bigger and better on technology. Robo-sourcing. Ducks, who needs ducks? But the Quantum of the Seas cruise ship, a ship that provides competition, of course, for the hotel industry, I might add, now have as an attraction robot bartenders. I think this is going to be a trend of the future. Who can provide a better robot, in a sense, and who can attract more visitors accordingly? Here's the beginnings of it in a hotel in Cupertino, California, the Aloft Hotel. There's the bottler, by the way, not the butler, the bottler. That little robot, of course, delivers basic items to hotel guests. It can take the elevator on its own, by the way. Quite a useful little item if you want to cut down on staff. If you really want to cut down on staff, take a visit and a trip to the Henna Hotel in Nagasaki, where these robotic reception humanoids have been employed. They're very real, they answer questions, their facial expressions can change, but I suspect they're programmed for 20 variations of smiles. There's no frowns at all programmed into that robot. Watch out, because robots, I think, are going to be a huge issue into the future when it comes to your industry. It's going to help, of course, your industry by getting the robots to do the dirty work, getting the robots to clean under the beds rather than make the poor staff in the hotel clean under the beds. The industry is changing, my friends. The industry is mutating. These trends and many more are going to buffet everything that you do. And ultimately, for all that I say and for all the time that I can spend on stage, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in Dubai or whether you are in Bangkok or whether you're in Berlin. It's going to become a lot more competitive in every aspect of your business. New airlines, new carriers, new hotel groups, Airbnbs, Ubers. It's all going to make the world much more competitive. And that's why I'm delighted to be in Dubai, because you're at the cutting edge here of leading the rest of the world. You thinking about tomorrow. So many of my clients don't think sufficiently about tomorrow. But don't rest on your laurels. Don't rest on your laurels. Others are coming. Others are coming to tackle aspects of your business. And it's incumbent upon you to take away what's discussed here, not just from me, but for the rest 2 days, and filter that in to a plan for the future to remain at the top of your game and ultra competitive. Thank you very, very much for your attention this morning.
Daniel, just come in. Thank you so much for those such interesting information that you've imparted to us. Some really good things that you came up with. But I noticed you didn't mention anything. I know you're a political analyst, but you didn't mention anything about the debt issues that the Western world's facing. and how that may change this growth pattern?
Well, I think that the focus of attention really has to move beyond the Western world. And whilst I don't discount the fact that we're going to see travelers, of course, travel in large numbers, as we have seen, that's been the feature of the last 50 years since the end of the Second World War. It's been a world in which Western travelers have largely featured and have dictated the needs of the industry. And my view now is that that's changing. It's those emerging market travelers that are going to dictate the needs of the industry. It's the specific domestic needs of a Chinese tourist or a nascent Indian or an African tourist who are going to be, I think, the more interesting focus area, notwithstanding, of course, a continued focus on the Western markets. From an economic point of view, the West will continue, I think, to perform relatively well in a very volatile climate, and I think there will be enough interest to show investment from the leisure industry in Europe. I think Europe, it's often been said, Jonathan, that for all the domestic problems in Europe, for all the debt issues in Europe, Europe is still a magnificent museum. It's a museum, of course, for tourists to come to. It shouldn't be a museum. It should be an economic powerhouse of the world. So even in times of debt slump in Europe, its museums, in the broad sense of the world, are going to be highly attractive to those Chinese and African and Indian tourists coming on stream.
Okay, so a good growth story there.
Yeah.
What about in terms of forecasting? You're a forecaster, so have you ever screwed up?
Yes, I think. Have I screwed up? No, I shouldn't say that on the stage. We're not supposed to say where we haven't forecast correctly. But I think it's very difficult to get the volatility, the creeping volatility in the world. It's very difficult to predict aspects of economic volatility. The global economic meltdown in 2008, 2009 was certainly something that I didn't foresee. There were some economists who claimed that they foresaw that, and well and good. But I didn't see that. And I think when we all do our forecasts now, there are two words, and there's a word I used already. It's going to be a competitive world going forward, but it's going to be a very volatile world economically as well. And one quarter's results are not going to be necessarily sustained into the next quarter, whether it's GDP figures, whether it's purchasing manager index figures going forward. Economic data is going to become a lot more volatile to predict over the medium term. And I think that's a feature of the volatility that's crept into the world and a feature of shifting horizons in the world away from these relatively small Western markets that we've all got used to the rest, right, in a sense. And we're going through that transition in the world for the moment.
So into the emerging markets. Daniel, Silke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Please show your appreciation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.